It was a quiet Sunday morning when Daniel Collins's life took a turn he could never have seen coming. The air was crisp, and the golden light of early spring spilled through the blinds of his small apartment in Portland. He was sipping coffee, half listening to a podcast, when his phone buzzed with a message that made him pause, mid-sip. It was from Emmy, someone he hadn't spoken to in almost 7 years. She was the one person he had once thought he'd spend forever with. And now, after all this time, she was reaching out with just 4 simple words. "Daniel, can we talk?" He stared at the screen, unsure what to do. His heart raced with a mixture of curiosity, nerves, and something he didn't want to name. He typed and erased several replies before settling on, "Sure. What's going on?" Her response came quickly. "Can I come by? It's important." That's when Daniel's morning stopped being ordinary. 2 hours later, she was standing at his door. Emma looked almost the same: soft brown hair, calm green eyes, that familiar nervous smile. But there was something different too. A quiet weight behind her eyes, like life had taken more from her than she ever planned to give. They hadn't spoken since their breakup, when, filled with words neither could take back, he had moved on, or at least, told himself he had. "Hi," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, stepping aside. "Come in." The moment she entered, it felt like old air had been stirred. Familiar, yet strange. They sat across from each other on the couch, an awkward silence between them. Finally, she took a breath. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." "Okay," Daniel said carefully. "What's going on?" Her hands trembled slightly. "It's about my husband." Daniel blinked. The word hit him in the chest. Husband. He had known she got married years ago. He saw the photos on social media once, but hearing it from her lips felt different. "What about him?" he asked. She looked down. "He's sick." "Really sick?" "And before you ask, yes, we've seen doctors, specialists, everyone. But he asked for something last week. Something I don't know how to handle." Daniel leaned forward, his voice soft. "What did he ask for?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He wants to meet you." Daniel froze. "Me? Why would he want to meet me?" Emma swallowed hard. "Because he knows about us. He knows everything, how serious we were. He told me he doesn't want to leave anything unresolved. He said he needs to talk to you before he goes through with his next treatment." Daniel's pulse quickened. This wasn't what he expected when she texted him. He looked at her, confused and cautious. "Emma, I don't understand. What does he think talking to me will fix?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He said he wants peace. And he thinks that means making peace with the people who shaped my life before him." She tried to smile through it, but her voice cracked. "That means you, Daniel." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Daniel didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to refuse. He didn't owe her husband anything. But another part, the part that still cared about her, couldn't, ignored the pain in her eyes. He rubbed his hands together, thinking, when does he want to meet? She exhaled shakily. "Tomorrow evening, around 6. He nodded slowly. "All right." Her shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy." Daniel gave a small, tight smile. "No, it's not. But I guess some things are meant to find closure, one way or another." When she left, the apartment felt even quieter than before. Daniel stood by the window for a long time, staring at the city skyline. He thought about the years he'd spent moving on, the memories he'd buried, the things he never said. Now, suddenly, it was all coming back, dragged into the light by a man he had never met. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. This meeting was going to change something, maybe everything. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Daniel lay awake, replaying their conversation. Questions circled his mind. What kind of man asks to meet his wife's ex? And more importantly, what was he going to say when they met? He turned toward the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the room. His chest tightened with a mix of dread and curiosity. He had no idea that this request, the one he never expected, was about to pull him into a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, forgiveness, and the human heart. Daniel barely touched his breakfast the next morning. His mind was too crowded with thoughts, every one of them circling back to the same uneasy question: why him? He wasn't afraid to meet Emma's husband, but the reason behind the request haunted him. What kind of man, knowing his time was running short, asked to meet his wife's former love? By early afternoon, Daniel had convinced himself this was a mistake. He even drafted a message to cancel, something polite, something like, "I don't think my presence will help." But he couldn't bring himself to send it. Deep down, A quiet voice whispered that maybe this wasn't about Emma or her husband. Maybe it was about him, about something he needed to face after all these years. At 5:45 p.m., Daniel pulled into the driveway of a small house in northeast Portland. The front yard was neatly kept, though the flower beds had the look of someone who hadn't had much energy lately to tend them. Emma opened the door before he even knocked. "Hey," she said, her voice calm but tired. "Come in, he's waiting." Daniel stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of vanilla candles and medicine. As he walked down the hall, he caught sight of framed photos on the wall, wedding pictures, travel memories, family smiles. And then, one photo stopped him, cold. It was Emma, years younger, sitting on a park bench. He recognized the shot he had taken it. She noticed his pause. "He wanted that one up," she said softly. "He said it reminded him of how much I've lived." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They entered a small living room where a man sat in a recliner by the window. "Daniel, this is Michael," Emma said quietly. Michael looked thin but strong in spirit. His hair was short, his eyes a striking blue. Despite the clear weariness in his body, his smile was steady. He extended a hand. "So you're the famous Daniel Collins." Daniel hesitated, then shook his hand. "I don't know about famous." Michael chuckled softly. "Emma's told me a lot about you. Don't worry, all good things." Daniel glanced at Emma, who looked away, her eyes glistening. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. "I'm fine," Daniel said. Michael nodded toward the chair opposite him. "Have a seat. I just wanted a few minutes of your time." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Daniel waited, letting Michael take his time. Finally, Michael spoke. "I know this is strange. I mean, it's not every day a man invites his wife's ex over for coffee." Daniel gave a faint smile. "You could say that." Michael's voice softened. "I wanted to meet you because I'm not afraid of what's coming, but I am afraid of leaving things behind that matter." Daniel frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Michael took a shallow breath. "Emma told me about your story, how close you two were, how things ended. I could see that part of her heart never completely healed. She loves me, Daniel, but I also know you're part of who she is." He looked up, eyes clear. "And before I leave this world, I want her to have peace, real peace. That means no loose ends, no regret." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "That's generous of you." Michael smiled weakly. "Not generosity, just love, the way I've learned it. It's not about possession, it's about giving what the other person needs, even if it costs you." For a while, neither of them spoke. Emma stood near the kitchen doorway, silent, listening. Then Michael said something Daniel didn't expect. "I want you to do something for me." Daniel straightened. "What kind of something?" Michael's voice trembled slightly but stayed firm. "When I'm gone, I want you to look out for her. Not because she needs saving, but because she deserves someone who truly knows her heart. I believe that might still be you." Daniel blinked. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Michael said. "You to have a bond that time didn't erase. I can see it. I can feel it. I don't want her to walk through grief alone." Daniel shook his head, trying to find the right words. "Michael, I don't know if I'm the right person for that. We have history, complicated history." Michael smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's exactly why you are." Emma stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Michael, please, don't." He held up his hand gently. "It's okay, Em. I'm not asking for promises. I just want to know that when I can't be here, someone who once loved you deeply will make sure you keep living." His words hung in the air, tender but unbearably heavy. Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." Michael looked at him steadily. "Just say you'll think about it." Daniel nodded slowly. "All right, I'll think about it." A faint smile touched Michael's lips. "That's all I needed." Emma wiped her eyes. "I think that's enough for today." Michael nodded, exhausted. "Thank you, Daniel, really." As Daniel stood to leave, Michael's voice stopped him one last time. "Daniel." "Yeah." Michael's tone softened to a whisper. "Don't wait too long to forgive what's behind you. Life's shorter than we think." Daniel met his gaze, feeling something shift inside him, something he hadn't let move in years. He left the house with the weight of those words pressing on his chest, the cool evening air doing little to calm the ache in his heart. When he reached his car, he turned back and saw Emma standing at the door, watching him. Their eyes met, full of things neither dared to say, and in that silent exchange, Daniel knew his life was about to change again. Daniel couldn't shake the meeting from his mind. Every word Michael spoke echoed like a whisper he couldn't turn off. He had met many people in his life, but none like that man, someone facing the end with such quiet strength, someone whose love was big enough to include even the one who came before him. That night, Daniel sat on his couch with the lights off, the city outside flickering through his window. He thought about Emma's face, her trembling voice, and Michael's calm acceptance of the unthinkable. He'd walked into that house expecting discomfort. Instead, he walked out with something heavier, responsibility. The next day, Daniel tried to return to his normal life. He went to work, joined meetings, answered calls, but everything felt muted. During lunch, his coworker, Mark, noticed his distraction. "You okay, man? You look like your head's somewhere else." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Just thinking about some old stuff or old someone," Mark teased lightly. Daniel didn't answer. He just looked out the window, lost in thought. That night, he found himself driving again without deciding to. His car took the same turn, the same road that led to Emma's neighborhood. He parked down the street. Engine off, just staring at the warm glow coming from her living room. He told himself he wasn't going to knock. He just needed to see she was all right. But before he could leave, the front door opened. Emma stepped outside, wrapped in a sweater, holding a mug of tea. She saw him almost immediately. Their eyes met under the dim porch light. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she walked toward him slowly, her steps careful, her face unreadable. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed. "Not really." She glanced at his car, then back at him. "Do you want to come in?" He hesitated. "Is he asleep?" she said. "He had a rough day, but he'd be happy you came." That last part made something twist in Daniel's chest. He followed her inside. The house was quiet, dimly lit by the soft hum of a table lamp. She poured another cup of tea and handed it to him. "Thanks," he said, sitting on the couch. For a moment, they said nothing, just silence and the weight of years hanging between them. Finally, Emma spoke. "I didn't expect him to say those things yesterday." Daniel nodded. "Neither did I." She smiled faintly. "He's always been that way, strong in the places I'm not. Sometimes I think he sees life differently because he knows how little of it he has left." Her voice wavered on that last word, and she looked down. Daniel wanted to say something comforting, but everything he thought of felt hollow, so instead, he said quietly, "He's a good man." She nodded. "He really is." They sat there for a while, sipping tea, letting the silence stretch into something almost peaceful. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Emma asked, "Do you ever think about us?" Daniel looked at her. "More than I want to admit." She gave a sad smile. "Me too." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing leaves against the window. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she set her mug down. "I used to wonder what would have happened if we hadn't let pride ruin everything." Daniel's chest tightened. "We were young, stubborn." "I know," she said softly, "but sometimes, I still miss who we were." Her words hung in the air, fragile and true. He wanted to reach out to hold her hand, to let her know he still cared, but he stopped himself. It wasn't right, not now. Instead, he said, "You've built a life, Emma, a good one. Don't let regret steal that." Her eyes shimmered. "It's hard not to think about what's slipping away." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I get that." And he did, more than he wanted to, as the clock ticked toward midnight. Emma walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I know this is complicated." He gave her a gentle look. If you need anything, just call me." She nodded, tears glinting under the porch light. "I will." He turned to leave but heard her voice again, softer this time. "Daniel." He looked back. "Yesterday, when Michael asked you to look after me," she paused, her breath trembling. "Did you mean it when you said you'd think about it?" Daniel met her gaze, steady and sincere. "Yes, I did." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then she gave a small nod, as if that answer was all she needed to get through the night. As he drove home, Daniel felt the weight of 1,000 memories pressing against his chest. He thought of Michael's eyes, the calm of a man who had made peace with his fate. He thought of Emma's voice, the mix of love and sorrow tangled in every word. And he thought about the strange, almost impossible feeling that life was giving him a second chance. Though he couldn't yet see what that meant. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a long time, watching the rain begin to fall. He didn't know it yet, but the next time his phone rang, it would be Emma again, this time, with news that would change everything. The call came 3 days later, just after midnight. Daniel was half asleep when his phone buzzed across the nightstand. He reached for it, expecting some late work notification. But when he saw Emma's name, he sat up instantly. Emma. Her voice on the other end was trembling. Daniel. It's Michael. Daniel's chest tightened. What happened? He collapsed. The doctors say. She stopped to catch her breath. They say it might be time. There was a pause. The kind that breaks something inside you. I'm at St. Luke's Hospital, she whispered. Please, can you come? Daniel didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. By the time he reached the hospital, it was 1:20 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The halls nearly empty except for the quiet footsteps of nurses. He found Emma sitting outside a hospital room, her hands clasped tightly together, eyes red from crying. When she saw him, she stood, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked completely lost. He's sleeping, she said, her voice breaking. They don't think he'll wake up again. Daniel stepped closer. I'm so sorry. She didn't answer. She just fell into his arms, sobbing quietly against his chest. He held her without speaking, letting her grief fill the silence. When she finally pulled back, her voice was barely a whisper. He kept asking if you'd come, even before he collapsed. Daniel swallowed hard. Can I see him? Emma nodded and led him inside. Michael lay pale and still, his breathing shallow. Machines hummed quietly around him. Daniel stood beside the bed, unsure what to say to a man who had faced everything with more grace than most could imagine. Hey, Daniel said softly. It's me, Daniel. For a moment, there was no movement. Then, faintly, Michael's eyelids fluttered. His voice was weak but steady. I knew you'd come. Daniel leaned closer. Yeah, I'm here. Michael smiled faintly. Good. I wanted to say thank you. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Michael's breath came slow and labored. You being here. It means she won't be alone. Daniel's throat tightened. She's stronger than you think. I know, Michael whispered. But even strong hearts break. Promise me you'll help her remember, life isn't over when I'm gone. Daniel hesitated. I'll do my best. Michael nodded slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for Emma's. That's all I needed. The three of them stayed like that for a while. Daniel standing quietly, Emma holding Michael's hand, and Michael drifting in and out of consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Emma and smiled. You've loved me better than I ever deserved. Don't say that, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. He turned his gaze to Daniel. And you, thank you for coming back into her life. You'll understand someday why I wanted this. Daniel couldn't speak. He just nodded, emotion choking his words. Michael's breathing slowed. His lips moved once more, barely a whisper. Take care of her. And then, silence. The monitors went still. The steady beeping flattened into a single unwavering tone. Emma's cry broke the quiet. She clutched Michael's hand as doctors rushed in, but it was already over. Michael was gone. Hours passed in a blur. Forms, condolences, nurses moving softly through the room. By dawn, the sun rose over Portland, painting soft light across the hospital windows. Emma sat in the waiting area, drained, her eyes distant. Daniel sat beside her in silence. There were no right words, only presence. Finally, she whispered, he was my whole world. Daniel nodded. I know. She looked at him, her eyes red but steady. He asked you to take care of me, didn't he? Daniel hesitated. He did. She looked down at her hands. That sounds like him, always thinking of everyone else. They sat there until the morning light filled the room, quiet and lost in thought. Over the next week, Daniel stayed close, not because of the promise, but because he couldn't imagine leaving her alone. He helped her with arrangements, with phone calls, with things no one should ever have to face alone. The funeral was small, intimate, family, a few close friends, and quiet tears. When it was over, Emma stood at the graveside long after everyone else had gone. Daniel waited a few steps behind, giving her space. Finally, she turned to him. He told me once that love doesn't end, it just changes form. Daniel nodded slowly. He was right. Her voice trembled. I don't even know who I am without him. You're still you, Daniel said softly. You're just learning to breathe again. She looked up at him then, not as the woman he once loved, but as someone standing at the edge of something new and uncertain. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. You don't have to, he said gently. Not alone. That night, after he dropped her home, Daniel sat in his car, staring at the dark sky. Michael's words came back to him again. Don't wait too long to forgive what's behind you. And for the first time in years, Daniel understood what that meant. Maybe forgiveness wasn't just about others, maybe it was about forgiving yourself for what you lost, for what you couldn't fix, for the love that never truly left. He looked back at the house, where Emma's lights still glowed softly in the window, and whispered into the night, "I'll keep my promise." The weeks that followed were quiet, filled with small routines that barely held back the weight of absence. Emma's house felt emptier than ever, though Daniel came by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to check in. At first, their conversations were practical: bills, errands, things that needed fixing. But gradually, silence turned into small laughter. And small laughter turned into moments of peace. Grief didn't vanish, simply softened its edges. Daniel never tried to replace Michael. He didn't even think it possible. Instead, he showed up in quiet ways, mowing the lawn, making coffee, staying through long evenings when sleep wouldn't come. And somewhere in that quiet companionship, something fragile began to mend. One evening, a little over a month after the funeral, Emma invited him to dinner. She'd cooked nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but the effort meant something. It was the first time she'd done that since losing Michael. They ate by candlelight. Not for romance but for comfort. Halfway through the meal, she looked up and said softly, "You know what I miss most?" Daniel smiled gently. "What's that?" "The sound of another person breathing in the house. Isn't that strange?" He shook his head. "Not strange at all. Sometimes the quiet is the hardest part." She nodded, her eyes glimmering. "You always understood things like that." After dinner, they sat on the porch. The night air was cool, the city humming faintly in the distance. Emma wrapped herself in a blanket and looked up at the stars. "Michael used to say the stars were memories," she said. "That may be when people go. They leave a light behind, even if we can't see it right away." Daniel looked up to, then he left a bright one. She smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. He really did. For a while, they just sat there, no words needed. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. Then Emma turned to him, her voice steady. "Daniel, I don't know what happens next, but I want to keep living. For him, for me." He nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do." Her gaze softened. Yes, Daniel said quietly. "We." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emma began volunteering at the local hospital where Michael had stayed. Daniel helped her with small projects, their painting, organizing donations, fixing whatever was broken. It became their quiet rhythm, one built not on romance, but on understanding. Still, something unspoken lingered between them. One afternoon, after a long day at the hospital, Emma said softly, "You've kept every promise you made." Daniel smiled faintly. "I said I'd do my best." "And you did," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "You saved me from being lost." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "No, Emma, you saved yourself. I just walked beside you." She held his gaze, her eyes warm but unreadable. "Then don't stop walking." A year later, on a spring morning, much like the one when this all began, they stood together at Michael's grave. The air smelled of blooming lilacs. Birds sang somewhere in the distance. Emma laid down fresh flowers and brushed her fingers over the stone. "You were right," she murmured. "Love doesn't end." Daniel stood beside her, silent, respectful. After a moment, she turned to him. "You know, sometimes I think he planned this. That somehow, he wanted us to find a way to live again." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe he did." They stood there for a while, the breeze gentle around them, and in that stillness, there was peace, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that remembers without pain. As they walked back toward the car, Emma glanced at Daniel. "Do you ever think about how strange life is?" "All the time," he said with a quiet laugh. She smiled. "Then maybe that's what makes it beautiful." He nodded, and as the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the path ahead, Daniel realized something. He had come full circle from heartbreak to forgiveness, from loss to a quiet kind of love that didn't need to be named. Michael had been right all along. Love wasn't about holding on, it was about letting go, and still choosing to care. And as Daniel and Emma walked side by side, neither trying to define what they were, both knew one truth deeply: sometimes, the most unexpected requests lead to the most healing journeys. The end.